We were never friends. We never spoke to each other, only on the set.
From the moment it first aired in 1974, the show Good Times was a milestone in television. It brought a working-class black family into American homes, showcasing their warmth, humor, and heart. Jimmie Walker's character, J.J. Evans, instantly became a household name. Yet, while audiences were entertained, a different narrative was unfolding off camera. This was a story of conflicting visions, behind-the-scenes friction, and missed opportunities. For decades, speculation surrounded the real events on set, the secrets, the tensions, and the choices that would forever alter the show's course. Now, after years of keeping silent, Jimmie Walker is finally sharing what most fans didn't know about Good Times. This isn't just a nostalgic look back. It's an honest account of how a pioneering show nearly lost its essence. What you are about to discover may completely change the history you thought you knew. The moment that altered everything. When Good Times premiered in February 1974, it had a quiet debut. It was a half-hour sitcom about a black family residing in a Chicago public housing project. Few people expected this spin-off from Maude to have such a lasting impact on both American television and culture. Conceived by Eric Monte and Mike Evans, and developed by Norman Lear, the series was designed to voice the experiences of working-class African-American families. Almost immediately, it became more than just a typical sitcom. It became a cultural touchstone, a flashpoint, a national phenomenon. A key reason for this rapid rise was Jimmie Walker's portrayal of James, J.J. Evans Jr. With his lanky frame and expressive face, Walker's energy seemed to jump off the screen. His interpretation of J.J. was full of comedic precision and undeniable charisma. With his exaggerated movements, wide-eyed expressions, and powerful exclamation of "Dynamite!" he coined a catchphrase that would not only define his character, but also secure the show's place in popular culture. Merchandise, talk show appearances, parodies, Dynamite became a sensation. But behind the scenes, this fame came with a heavy price. While fans loved J.J. and watched every week to see his jokes and antics, Walker was already sensing a growing disconnect between the on-screen action and the off-screen reality. The audience loved J.J., he would later state, but behind the camera, it was a totally different situation. What viewers didn't see was a deepening division, not only among the cast, but also between the show's original vision and its new direction. J.J.'s comedic persona started to overshadow the show's more serious, profound elements that it was meant to explore. As Walker's fame grew, so did the tensions with his co-stars and the creative team, who believed the show was straying from its core principles. The writer's room issue. To many at home, Good Times felt like a reflection of real life. The cramped apartment on Chicago's South Side, the mother's firm guidance, the father's protective love, the children's struggles, it all seemed authentic. However, for Jimmie Walker, that sense of realism was a carefully crafted illusion, with the writing staff at the heart of the problem. There were no black writers. Zero, he recalled bluntly. This wasn't simply a matter of overlooked talent, it was a fundamental flaw that influenced every script. The people creating the dialogue, shaping the plots, and setting the emotional tone of the series often had no personal knowledge of the life they were trying to portray. Walker described the scripts that resulted as superficial caricatures, a sanitized interpretation of black family life, filtered through a lens of suburban detachment. They hired white writers who knew nothing about the black experience. He said, "It wasn't malicious, but it was uninformed. They were guessing at things that needed to be truthful. Instead of portraying the complex realities of black life in 1970s America, the writers opted for safe humor, sitcom clichés, and exaggerated personalities. The show was filled with jokes, but the authenticity was slowly eroding. John Amos, who played the family's patriarch, James Evans, and Esther Roll, who portrayed the strong matriarch Florida Evans, pushed back forcefully. Both had backgrounds in theater rooted in realism and had long insisted that the show should represent the dignity and strength of black families. According to Walker, they were deeply upset by the change in tone. John and Esther would get up and leave the table reads, Walker remembered. They wanted more stories about what it was like to live in poverty and still keep your family together, not just scenes of JJ acting like a clown. Despite attempts to bring the show back to its original vision, the gap between the writers and the actors created an ever-widening rift. We would go to the producers and say, "This is not how it is in our neighborhoods," but 9 out of 10 times the scripts would remain unchanged. The actors were not just delivering lines, they were also fighting a losing battle to tell the truth. And with every suggestion ignored and every plea dismissed, the resentment grew. Tension in the family. To the millions watching in their living rooms, Good Times presented a loving, united family enduring hardship. But behind the scenes, Jimmie Walker recounts a harsh and often strained reality. The very chemistry that made the Evans family so beloved on screen was not present off screen, especially after his character JJ became the breakout star. Walker's rise was incredibly fast. His lively presence, distinctive delivery, and the now famous catchphrase, "Dynamite," captured the public's attention. But this very success created a divide between him and his co-stars. Esther Roll, who played the strong-willed matriarch Florida Evans, objected to the direction JJ's character was taking. She saw the increasing reliance on exaggerated physical comedy and slapstick as a betrayal of the show's purpose. In interviews and private talks, Roll expressed her concern that the character had been reduced to a stereotype. JJ was loud, foolish, and disconnected from the show's original depth. "We are not here to promote buffoonery," she once stated bluntly. John Amos, who played James Evans Sr., was equally critical. From the start, he had advocated for Good Times to reflect the real challenges faced by black families. He wanted it to be both meaningful and honest, in addition to being funny. Walker recalls the tension increasing with every episode where the focus shifted toward JJ's antics. The more the network executives leaned into the comedic goldmine, the more strained the relationship became. According to Walker, the set lost its sense of community. There was no hanging out. It was strictly professional, he said years later. Even in scenes depicting a close, knit family, he remembers the silence that would fall the moment they cut for a commercial break. There was no laughter between takes, no warm camaraderie, just the professionalism of actors doing their jobs and then returning to their separate spaces. As Walker put it, "They didn't like the direction the show was going, and I was the direction." He never blamed them for their position, but it led to emotional distance and creative isolation. What the audience never saw was the quiet disapproval, the subtle glances, and the lack of genuine connection. Furthermore, despite being the center of the show's popularity, Jimmie Walker felt like an outsider in the very family he was supposed to be a part of. From social commentary to sitcom, at its beginning, Good Times had a powerful purpose. It wasn't just another comedy, it was a window into a world that mainstream television had largely ignored. The show's creators, including Eric Monty and Mike Evans, envisioned a series that could entertain while also highlighting the realities of black life in inner-city America. They were not aiming for just laughs, they were aiming for truth. In its early seasons, that vision was intact. Episodes addressed topics like systemic racism, unemployment, public housing, and the pressures of poverty. All with humor, yes, but also with a profound foundation of truth. The balance between comedy and social commentary was the show's heartbeat. However, as the show's ratings rose, Walker explains, network executives began to focus on a different kind of success, the laughter caused by JJ's exaggerated persona. His signature hat, outrageous expressions, and constant jokes were too tempting for the network to ignore. They saw that the audience reacted to JJ's antics, so they wanted more of that, Walker said. The pressure grew to increase the humor, lighten the tone, and capitalize on JJ's popularity. Even at the cost of the show's deeper meaning, nuance was replaced with jokes. Scripts became more centered on one-liners and absurd situations. The themes that once gave the show its soul began to fade into the background. For Walker, the change was bittersweet. He knew his character was a hit, But he also saw what was being lost. It went from a show about black family struggles to a showcase for jokes and silliness. The message got lost. He remembers watching entire storylines being rewritten to JJ more screen time and more over-the-top material. Complex social issues were now being treated as subplots to a punchline. Even as the laughter grew louder, Walker said the emotional depth decreased. What had started as a bold experiment in socially conscious television was being reshaped by commercial interests. For the viewers, the change was gradual, a slow transformation over seasons. But for those on the inside, the change was sharp and undeniable. The family that once reflected a shared reality had become, in Walker's words, a cartoon version of itself. The evolution of Good Times stands as one of the earliest and most painful examples of how a show with a purpose could be derailed by popularity. And for Jimmie Walker, that irony would follow him for the rest of his career. Scripts over stand-up. Before he ever graced America's television screens with his explosive energy on Good Times, Jimmie Walker had already established a reputation in the world of stand-up comedy. He was quick, sharp, and authentic. He was the type of comedian who could read an audience, change direction mid-joke, and make it all seem effortless. His comedy wasn't just about getting laughs, it was about control, the ability to shape a moment, guide an audience, and improvise until something truly special happened. In comedy clubs, Walker was his own writer, director, and performer. But once he entered the controlled environment of a network sitcom, that creative freedom disappeared. I was told, stick to the script, Walker later revealed. The instruction was clear. There was no room for improvisation, no chance to improve lines with his own flair. Even when he saw chances to make a joke land better or be more impactful, he was shut down. Even if I knew I could make a line funnier, I wasn't allowed to change it. This limitation bothered him. He became famous for delivering witty lines, but the irony was that most of them were not his own. The writers, often white and unfamiliar with the rhythm of black speech and humor, wrote the lines for him. The result was a jarring disconnect. The man known to millions as the hilarious JJ was, in Walker's own words, a fabrication. It wasn't me up there, it was their version of me, he said. That's a strange position to be in when the thing you're famous for isn't actually yours. The dissonance wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Walker was being praised for a performance that, to him, felt inauthentic. He became a symbol of success in black entertainment, but internally, he felt he was becoming a character shaped, scripted, and packaged for mass appeal. His comedic instincts, honed over years in gritty clubs and smoky venues, were silenced in favor of a formula the studio considered safe and profitable. Over time, the cost of that creative suppression wore him down. He wasn't just losing jokes, he was losing ownership of his voice. The line between the character and himself became blurred, and what should have been a triumphant climb felt more like a quiet compromise. Moments that broke the mold. Even within the rigid structure of the sitcom format, there were exceptions. Moments where the raw, genuine emotion of real life broke through the laugh track. These episodes did not rely on punchlines or catchphrases. They tapped into something deeper, darker, and far more honest. Jimmie Walker remembers one such moment vividly, the scene following the sudden death of James Evans, the family's patriarch. Florida, played by Esther Roll, stood in her kitchen, overwhelmed by grief. She slammed a casserole dish onto the table and screamed, "Damn! Damn!" That scene wasn't meant to be funny. It was a gut punch, a brief but unforgettable moment when the sitcom genre let go of its facade and allowed grief to be real. The audience didn't expect it, and neither did Walker. Watching Roll's raw performance that day, he understood what Good Times could have been if it wasn't always trying to find a joke every 30 seconds. There were other moments, too. One particularly intense episode saw JJ clash with Florida over his growing irresponsibility. In a storyline that resonated with many young black men navigating adulthood without strong male role models, Florida made the painful decision to kick JJ out of the apartment. The studio audience fell silent. Suddenly, it was no longer a comedy, it had serious consequences. Behind the scenes, these heavier episodes often sparked heated debates in the writer's room and on set. Walker remembers the tension clearly. Those were the moments that showed what we could have been every week, but they were rare. The cast and some writers yearned for more balance, more stories that reflected the hardships and complexities of real black families in 1970s America, but the network had a formula, and JJ was the focus. Those glimpses of dramatic excellence were quickly followed by a return to safe, laugh-track, friendly gags. Still, they left a lasting impression. They proved that the show had range, that the cast, including Walker, was capable of delivering stories with depth and truth. It also reminded viewers that even within the confines of a sitcom, good times occasionally reached greatness, and those moments continue to resonate decades later. When popularity became a burden, the fame that once felt like a blessing quickly started to feel like a harsh glare. Jimmie Walker's rapid rise as J.J. Evans on Good Times made him a national sensation, the kind of television fame that could open any door except the ones on his own set. His face was on magazine covers, and he was a frequent guest on The Tonight Show, game shows, and radio interviews. But with all the public attention came a growing resentment from some of his castmates, and even a few crew members. It wasn't that they disliked Walker personally, it was what his popularity represented, a show becoming unbalanced. Walker remembered the coldness that developed behind the scenes as producers pushed for more of JJ's screen time, sometimes rewriting scenes to feature him more prominently or adding extra punchlines that disrupted the ensemble feel. "It's hard when your success is seen as the problem," he said years later, reflecting not just on his character's overexposure, but on the human cost backstage. When people look at you like you're the one who broke the show, it changes everything. Tensions escalated into open conflict on more than one occasion. During one particularly tense day on set, a crew member, frustrated with Walker's increasing creative input, snapped back by invoking Esther Rolle's authority, saying, "You've got to respect her. She was a man in this industry before most men were." The comment wasn't just about gender roles, it was a statement about command, strength, and presence. Esther Rolle, with her deep voice and unwavering gaze, stood her ground in a way that demanded respect. Walker would later repeat the line in interviews with a mix of respect and irony. "Yeah, she was a man. It wasn't mockery, it was an acknowledgement." Rolle had carried herself with such unyielding force that even in a room full of men in charge, she was often the one everyone listened to. But the deeper tragedy was that Walker's fame, instead of uniting the cast in a shared victory, only magnified the existing cracks in the show's foundation. The higher he soared, the more isolated he felt from the very people he was supposed to call his TV family. What should have been a golden era turned into a heavy burden, and the cost of that popularity was something he carried long after the cameras stopped rolling. An abrupt goodbye. When Good Times quietly aired its final episode in August 1979, there was no celebration, no retrospective montage, no emotional farewell, just a slow fade to black, and then nothing. For Jimmie Walker, the end of the show felt like being cut off mid-sentence, like a punchline without a laugh. There was no rap party, no big speech. "We just stopped," he recalled, describing it as one of the most anticlimactic endings he had ever experienced in show business. No hugs, no commemorative photos, just silence. The final season had been defined by fragmentation. Esther Rolle, who had left the show due to creative differences, returned reluctantly, and John Amos, whose character had been killed off earlier, remained absent. The original sense of unity was long gone. Episodes began to feel disconnected, as if the characters no longer lived in the same emotional world. Behind the scenes, the cast wasn't speaking much. There were no group dinners, no hallway jokes. It was as if everyone was just waiting for the curtain to close. And when it did, it was met not with tears but with relief. Not because anyone hated the show, but because by then, the tension had become unbearable. "We were all just done," Walker said. "It was like we'd outgrown each other, but nobody wanted to admit it." In the years that followed, Good Times would achieve classic status in syndication, its moments of joy and heartbreak etched into cultural memory. But among the cast, there was no real desire for reunions or retrospectives. The emotional scars ran too deep. Everyone had moved on, but not necessarily forward. Every member of the Good Times team carried their own complicated feelings about what the show had become and what it had taken from them. For Walker, the final days felt like unfinished business. The laughs had dried up, and so had the camaraderie. He described it best himself. It felt like leaving the stage in the middle of a joke, unfinished and unsatisfying. That feeling of something unresolved would linger for years. While Good Times lived on in reruns and nostalgia, the people who created it rarely came back together to see one another. The show had ended, but the silence that followed said more than any scripted finale ever could. What Walker says we missed. Decades away from the spotlight of Good Times, Jimmie Walker talks about the show with a mix of reverence, frustration, and a kind of sober clarity that only hindsight can provide. For all its success, he believes Good Times lost something crucial. Something audiences never saw, and something the industry never allowed them to show. We had the power to tell real stories, Walker said, pausing as if choosing each word carefully. But we got caught up in the joke. For Walker, the biggest tragedy wasn't the tension with his castmates or the creative clashes with the producers and writers. It was the loss of potential. The show had, in his opinion, a unique chance to challenge how black families were portrayed on television, not just as comedic relief or as symbols of poverty, but as nuanced, complex human beings. Instead, that opportunity slowly gave way to predictable punchlines and repetitive gags. What audiences missed, he insists, was a version of Good Times that could have gone deeper, one that gave equal voice to every character, not just to the loudest or funniest one. He believes the writer's room, lacking black voices, was part of the problem. We were living it. They were guessing at it, he said, referring to the disconnect between the real experiences of the cast and the imagined ones on the page. He also recalls moments on set when the cast felt more like separate islands than a united family. The energy shifted. You could feel it. We weren't building something together anymore. We were surviving it. Walker doesn't point fingers, but his disappointment is clear. There was a version of the show, he believes, that could have stood alongside the greatest dramatic comedies of its time. All in the Family. The Mary Tyler Moore Show matched, but sadly, that version was never allowed to thrive. In the end, Walker doesn't regret his role, but he remains haunted by the gap between what was and what could have been. Good Times was more than just a sitcom. It was a chance to reflect something real, to challenge stereotypes, to shift the conversation. A chance that too often slipped away. And perhaps that is the true legacy, not just what Good Times gave us, but what it almost did. Now that you've heard Jimmie Walker's side of the story, do you see Good Times the same way, or has the truth changed it for you forever? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this video with us, and we'll see you in the next one.